Hi everyone, I'm Mira, and this is Tanja. And we're here today to talk about how we turn players into storytellers. And we're going to do that by talking about our own experiences from developing a two-player mystery game called Tik Tok. Before we do that, we're just going to introduce ourselves a little bit more and talk about how we came into the game industry.
Yes. So, we're both game designers and writers, and we make experimental narrative games, and we have just founded our own company called Other Tales Interactive. And we met each other at university, where we studied our master in game design. And before that, Mira, she had a bachelor in creative writing and linguistics, and I had one from comparative literature. And when we first met, we wrote a lot of stories, we read a lot of books, and Mira, she was also an avid gamer. And I did not play so many games since my teenage years. And when we met, what Mira wanted to create was story-driven JRPGs with some epic battles like the one I'll just show you from Final Fantasy. And what I wanted to create worlds, and basically I wanted to make walking simulators. I had just played Dear Esther and found that that was pretty amazing. So what we wanted in the beginning was basically not quite the same, but we kept ending up making projects together because we worked really well together. We found it easy to write stories together, and we basically just worked well together. And then we thought, why not make a game just the two of us, make it entirely ourselves? So Mira, she started to learn programming, and I started to learn how to do art. I had some skills from before, but I needed to brush it up. So after some short experimentation, we created a game that's called Tik Tok. This is a screenshot from our prototype. The game is not done yet, but this is kind of what it looks like.
Yeah, and Tik Tok started when we were writing our master's thesis at university, and we wanted to investigate how to make a narrative for two. And we both love to read and play narrative games, but we realized that those activities were quite often experienced alone. So then at one point we were playing a narrative game together, and we had a great time solving the puzzles in it and unraveling its mysteries. But we still found it we're still a bit frustrated when we couldn't tap on the device they were using if the other player was holding it in their hands, basically. So to solve that, we just swapped the device back and forth. And that's also how we came up with the idea for Tik Tok, because we wanted to merge the social and narrative experience together, and so we both could uncover a narrative and cooperate in a local setting. And then we thought, what better way to do that than to make a game that is played on two devices instead?
Yes. So we basically came up with Tik Tok, a two-player mystery game, and as you see here, it's played on two devices. You can either play it on your tablet or your phone or a computer. And what the players have to do, they have to communicate a lot, and they have to read out loud to each other in order to progress in the game and in order to solve puzzles. And I'll just show you a little clip of how it actually looks like, so you can get a feel of the game. And you can also see the two screens next to each other. So just click wherever. There. Cool. So the story behind Tik Tok is that there's these two sisters, and they created two clocks. And these clocks, they trap people inside of them, and they steal people's time. So that time is being transferred to the sisters so they can effectively live forever. So what the players they need to do, they need to escape these clocks. So it's a little bit like a digital escape rooms played on the two devices. And yeah, then the narrative is also split in two. So the players, they have to communicate a lot in order to like figure out the story.
Yeah, what we mean when we say that we turn players into storytellers is basically that we're getting them to send narrative information across to each other. And they can do that by either read text out loud that we present them within the game, or they can also narrate their actions by saying, hey, let's walk into the house that you saw on the screen there before. And then they're also situating themselves in the game world, which is important for storytelling.
Yes, and while creating this game and doing a lot of research, we found that we have these like 5 points that is really effective in making players tell stories to each other. And they're basically scattered narrative elements, puzzle and narrative structure, written text, different perspectives, and ambiguity.
And when distributing narrative elements onto two devices, you can do that in a lot of different ways. You can either make sure that all the narrative elements are exactly the same on the two devices, or that they're completely different, or that it's a mix of the two. And for us, because we wanted to create a game that is focused on storytelling, we made sure that the players had some of the same information and some that the other can't see as well. So that basically means that one player can't see the entire picture or know the full story without getting information from the other player. And this also, the differences in the game gives the players something to talk about, a reason for them to always compare their game worlds, and just to tell each other what they see on their screen. And the similarities of the narrative elements gives the players a common base and a common language that they can use when they're communicating with each other. And it's quite, like Tanja said, it's like an escape room in a bit as well, where you put players in a particularly themed setting, and then they also then get the same goal. And it also makes it easier for them to develop a shared mindset, which helps or makes the player work better together. And when the player works together in Tik Tok, they're basically narrating what they're doing, as I said before. And then they here become storytellers by doing that. And here's an example from a puzzle that you see when you enter the house in the game world. And here one player gets into a room where there's 3 clocks, and the other player gets into a room where 3 text pieces have been hidden and their hair been found. And one of these reads, he flew out around 6:30, no, maybe an hour later, which tells the first player that they have to set their clocks to 7:30. I'll just find my way. And this puzzle makes use of both visual narrative elements and written text, and it also shows an example of a puzzle structure that we're using in Tik Tok, which brings us to our next point, which is puzzle and narrative structure.
Yeah, so like when we want players to communicate narrative content to each other, it's really important that you intertwine the narrative together with the puzzle, but also that you have a puzzle structure so players, they can actually not solve the puzzle on their own. They need to communicate all the time. So we use a puzzle structure where we give one player the problem and then we give the other player the solution. So they have to communicate in order to solve a puzzle. And a game that does this really well is Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes. So basically you give one player the problem, they have the bomb and they need to disarm it, but the player don't know how. And then the other player has the solution, they have the manual on actually how to disarm this bomb, and they then have to communicate to solve the task. Then we also have another structure where both players have part of the problem and both players have part of the solution. And we do this in order to not make the players have the same role the whole time, but also keep them just as active through the whole game. And we try to make that puzzle structure in most of our puzzles. Yes. Then we also try to make the narrative in itself a puzzle. So we use anagrams and we use riddles. Here we have a famous one from our dear Harry Potter. Yes, and this is basically to tell the players, you have to read the narrative, you have to go one level deeper in order to solve some of the puzzles. And these are often made in written text, which is the next point. There.
Yeah, we use written text in Tik Tok in order to enhance storytelling, basically. And here's an example from the very first puzzle that we use that the players see in the game. And it's a quite simple puzzle where the players just have to read text out loud to each other. And the players receive 2 clocks, which has an engraving on it, and they have to interpret this engraving in order to solve the puzzle. So one of them says, "Meet me at the witching hour," while the other one says, "We will live beyond the edges of time." And also in the top left corner, the players get a note, which gives the player a clue on how to play the game and also hints at the mystery of the story. And by presenting the players with different written text in the very beginning of the game, we also kind of easing them into their role of becoming storytellers. And here just simply by reading the text that they see out loud. And then we have another puzzle which the players have to read text out loud to construct a story together. And the players find this puzzle in the clock shop of the world. And here, the players are presented with a room that looks very similar, but the only difference is the numbers of the buttons on their phones. And all the buttons, when you press them, they reveal a part of a story, that they give you part of a sentence. So when player number 1 presses button number 2, they get a sentence that doesn't start or end. So it's not until player 2 finds button number 9 that they see the start of a sentence, and then they can start put that together. So that reads, "Once upon a time, there was a little bird. She felt all alone until another flew by. A river with wings, black," and they have to keep constructing the story by finding the right combinations of buttons and match the correct text together. And all the puzzles that we made in Tik Tok has gone through a lot of iterations, and the text has become shorter and shorter each time. And what you see here is not final either. It might not become shorter, but it's still working on that. And a really good example of short written text in games is found in Sword and Sorcery, where all the written text is written in a Twitter format using 140 characters or less. And another really good example is the Sailor's Dream, where the text is also kept very short, and that's something that accounts for a player or a reader's attention span. And when we wrote the text in Tik Tok, we also realized it was important to figure out what style we should use. And we realized quite quickly that we had to avoid using old-fashioned texts because player found it quite uncomfortable reading that aloud. And we found the same thing when we added too much rhyme in the text because people found it quite difficult to understand, and it was also, they just felt uncomfortable doing that. And so it's important for us that we don't alienate any players or readers by presenting them with a language that seems foreign to them, because it feels like we're already asking them to do something that might be out of their comfort zone, just reading text out loud to each other.
Yes, and then we have different perspectives. Like the 2 clocks there's in the 2 devices, they belong to the 2 sisters. So Amelie and Lærke. So one device will hold one character's personality and memories and recollection of events, and the other device will hold the other. And we do this in order to give 2 sides of a story. And so the players can kind of like, when they sit with their device each, they can kind of put together the full picture. And we also emphasize this by using 2 different soundscapes. So Amelie, she's this confident person, and she's very ambitious, so her sounds in her device will be more strict and they will be more clear, while Lærke, she's a more shy person, so her sounds will be softer and a little bit more hesitant. Yes. And yeah, and when we divide this up on the 2 devices, it's a little bit like scattered narrative elements. Then when you have like these 2 sides, you get players to communicate together about like what is actually going on. And especially when you have 2 characters, like they will have different recollection of memories, and they might even like straight up lie sometimes. So the players, they have to figure out who is actually telling the truth and discuss that while they play.
We also introduced ambiguity in Tik Tok due to its positive effect it has on narrative communication. Because when you introduce ambiguity, it gives the text, introduce an uncertainty to text, which the players have to figure out the right meaning of. And they can interpret it in more than one way. And therefore, ambiguity can get readers to step into a more creative role as interpretive participants instead of just observing what is being unfolded. And the audience will fill in the gaps themselves, or they will also evaluate alternative meanings by comparing it with their own reality. And we introduced the ambiguity in Tik Tok to make the interpretation of story pieces and narrative elements more challenging and engaging, just so the players can figure out the story and construct it in their own way. We don't need the players to figure out the exact same story that we created, and as we only give them part of the story anyway, it's up to them to fill in the gaps. And what Tanja said before is also a really good use of trying to figure out, or by having ambiguity, it tells the players that they should try to find out who is actually telling the truth.
Cool. And now we'll just show you 2 players. It was a playtest we had, and we just recorded them, gave them the tablets, recorded. And here we have them reading out loud, effectively like passing the role of a storyteller back and forth between them. So we'll just show you how it looks like. So we have Rune and Sophie here.
One time there was a little bird. She felt all alone.
She felt all alone until another flew by. A raven with wings black.
As coal, she decided she would call it coal. The 2
Birds robbed everyone blind. They roamed together until he fell.
So yeah, that's a little snippet of a playthrough, how it actually goes down.
And yeah, so we're now at the end of this talk, and we'll just briefly summarize what we talked about. Because we wanted to make a game that turns players into storytellers, we need to make sure that we're aware of these 5 points, basically. So it's scattered narrative elements, which the differences give players something to talk about and a reason for them to compare their game world. And the similarities there gives the players the same goal and gives them a language they can use when communicating. And then it was a puzzle and narrative structure, which we do by intertwining puzzle and narrative elements. We make sure that the narrative is the focus of the puzzle solving. And also by making puzzles which the players can't solve by themselves, we make sure that they communicate more as well. And written text kind of gives the players something to step off from. They can just start by reading that out loud, basically. And the 4th thing is different perspectives, which gives the players 2 sides of one story. And the last and 5th thing is ambiguity, which the uncertainty introduced into text gives the players a chance to construct their own meaning. And it also makes sure that the construction of the stories for every player becomes different. It becomes unique to their playthrough of the game.
Yes, so this is our talk. Thank you for listening. And yeah, if you follow our adventures, if you want to do that, we're on Twitter, Facebook, webpage, all that stuff. And then we actually have time for some questions, if there is any. Any questions?
Yeah,
there's a microphone like position that.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe we can hear you.
Cool.
That's cool. So the question was, when do we plan to release this game, and where can you get it? We're quite early in development. We're still working on our vertical slice, but we are planning like within a year or something like that. We will be out.
Yeah.
So
hopefully October 2017. Cool.
Yes.
And then, because you can also play this game on different devices, because it's not networked either. So you can get it, play with an iOS and an Android at the same time. So eventually, you should be able to get it on the App Store, the Google Play Store, and Steam, and Humble Bundle, and all those.
Get it everywhere. Yeah. Any other questions?
No? Cool. Thank you very much for listening,
thank you so much.
everyone. Have a good day. Cool.